Okay, it's recording. Good afternoon, Jakko. My name is Claudio. I'm calling you from Washington, D.C., from the studios in Fairfax City. We are very humbled and grateful that Jakko Jakszyk accepted our invitation to our show. Jakko, welcome to the show, man.
Hello, good evening, as it is from here.
That's right. So with everything that's going on with the pandemic and you're not being able to tour and go out that much, how has this affected your life, your family life, your creativity, your sanity, and everything included, man?
Yeah, I'm clinging on to all of it. It's been a very weird year all round, really. As I'm sure it has been for everybody. But yes, this time last year, I was just about to finish the solo record. Then I was about to prepare a one-man show I was going to do at the Edinburgh Festival.
Yep.
And then we were going to rehearse, and then we were going to do an American tour of biggish venues, outdoor venues mostly. And then I was going to come back, and then I was going to do the Edinburgh Festival along with my kids, because my son was playing for a very famous comedian who appears in one of my videos, in fact. And my son's band were going to be his band. So we were all going to be up in Edinburgh for August, and then I was going to come back and then promote the album. And the only thing that happened was the album. Everything got postponed apart from that. So I don't know where the last year's tour has been. Was originally postponed to June of this year, and then it got pushed back, and then it's been pushed back again. So I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, I bought tickets to fly to London in mid-May to see Eric Clapton at the Royal Albert Hall, and I don't know if it's going to happen or not. I mean,
they've not cancelled it officially yet.
No, they have not. I sent an email and they say we'll let you know plenty of time in advance.
Well, I think they've reestablished this kind of roadmap to freedom, which began on Monday.
Yeah.
So the kids went back to school on Monday. My daughter went back to school yesterday.
Yeah.
And then in 3 weeks' time, some other restrictions lift, including the playing of outdoor sport, because I play football, or soccer as you would call it, I guess.
Yeah.
No, you're Italian, right? So no, of course it's football. Yeah, it's football.
I'm a big time football guy, man.
Yeah,
what's your team in the UK?
Who do I support?
Yeah.
Well, I cheat slightly because I support two teams.
Yeah.
I support the team that was nearest to where I was born.
Yeah.
And that's a team called Arsenal.
Yeah, of course I know Arsenal. Yeah.
And then I support the other team that in the town where I grew up, and then I grew up outside and became a season ticket holder, and that's a team called Watford.
Yeah. But those are there's not in the Premier, right? They are in the...
Well, Watford were in the Premier League for a number of years, but they got relegated last season.
Yeah.
And now I don't have the conflict that I normally have. So Arsenal are in one league and Watford are in the other.
Yeah, they used to be... Actually, I was born in Chile, and I came to the United States to study.
Oh, okay.
So a guy from Chile, Alexis Sanchez, used to be with Arsenal.
Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant player with Arsenal. Went to Man United, it was rubbish. What? That made no sense, but he's
so Man United paid too much money for him, and then he wasn't playing in the role that should be playing. So
he was fantastic for Arsenal. Brilliant.
He was fantastic for Arsenal. Terrible for United. They get rid of him. Now he's playing Italy.
But, well, that was the last show I played live was in Santiago.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did 2 shows in Santiago, and we got there. We had a day off, and the promoter knew that I was a big football fan, so he got us tickets to go and see. I've forgotten the name. University de
Católica.
Yeah, and we went to the National Stadium and saw the game, and the standard of football was really good. I was very glad, it was great. Yeah.
I'm glad you have a good time. Yeah. So after high school, I came here to the United States, and like I mentioned before, music is my passion. I'm a computer engineer. I do something else for a living, and then it so happened that I have a lot of music and jazz, rock, electronic, soft pop, and about 6 months ago I decided to put a couple of online radio together. I started with a soft rock one. It went very well. Then I put together a jazz and rock one. Then I put an electronic radio together, and then I began doing interviews. And now I have over 1,000 listeners from people over the world a week. And I have done over 50 interviews, people from Genesis, Steve Hackett and Anthony Phillips. So
Steve.
I can't complain, man. Can't complain.
Yeah, right.
So were you born like in a musical family at all?
Well, I didn't know that I was, but yes, I was. It turns out when I was born in London, and I was given up for adoption by my mother.
Yeah.
So I was adopted by a couple who'd ended up in England after the war. My adoptive father was Polish, hence my surname, and my adopted mother was French. I kind of grew up. I knew that I was adopted as I grew up, but I didn't find my real mother till I was in my early 20s. And it turned out that she was quite a well-known singer in Ireland in the 50s. She fronted one of the biggest show bands out there. I had no knowledge of that at all. So yeah, that's odd, isn't it? There's obviously a genetic component that was driving me on, and I had no idea where it came from.
It was, it's in my head. Yeah, I read that you track your mom down, and it's something that you have no options. You needed to do it. It was the curiosity that was killing you, or
yeah, it felt like I needed to do it. To me, yeah. I know some adopted kids have no interest in that at all, but for me, it was. I think partly because being brought up by my adoptive parents, because they were both from other parts of the world, we had no family. There was no family in England. So my father's family were either stuck behind the Iron Curtain, in Poland or East Germany. And my mother's family. Well, I then later found out that my mother had a similar trajectory to mine, and she had a half brother in France. So as a kid, there was no family get-togethers. There was, it was quite an austere, lonely childhood. So I think that was partly responsible for my drive to discover where I really came from. And then I found out that I'm kind of Irish, really. Yeah.
Well, sometimes things happen in life, and your parent did the best they could, and your parent for
my adoptive mother was absolutely wonderful.
Incredible. So and when do you begin playing the guitar? When you pick up an interest in the guitar?
Well, my adoptive father had played guitar in a Ukrainian folk group in Poland. So there was an acoustic guitar that was kind of knocking around the house. It was around. He didn't play it because he, before he came to England, he had an accident in his father's workshop where he worked as a carpenter, and he sliced off half of his index finger on his left hand. So this guitar was always knocking around, and I would pick it up, and I didn't take it seriously for a while, but I messed around with it sufficiently to have developed calluses, I guess. So that when I decided to take it seriously, it wasn't as painful an experience as it might have been had I taken it up from scratch, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And then you remember the first band that you were involved with in the equivalent of high school here? Yeah.
Do you mean playing or listening?
Yeah, playing. Playing.
Well, yeah, I had I was doing a lot of stuff at home. And I created a band. There was a 3-piece band that I had at school, and then I had an amazing English teacher who was very progressive and inspirational and unusual, and he used to do a lot of the theatrical productions, and I used to act.
Yeah.
So I acted in a lot of the school plays, and he was about to leave, and he wanted to do a kind of final production before he left. So he wanted to write a musical, and he said, look, let's write it together. So he wrote the words and I wrote the music, and he was amazing. He got me, I mean, this is in the 70s, early 70s. So he managed to get the loan of a Revox tape recorder.
Yeah.
And he managed to persuade my headmaster that he thought I was talented enough that it was a sensible thing to do. And I had 2 weeks off school. So everybody else went to school. I stayed at home with a Revox tape recorder. And I wrote and created these backing tracks by overdubbing, by bouncing one side to another. And then we did this performance where I played along to the backing tracks I'd created, having taught the children of the cast the songs that I'd written. So that's kind of where it all kicked off and started, and I owe him an enormous debt, really.
Yeah. Those steps still exist, or they're gone?
No, thank goodness they don't exist. So I can exaggerate about how good they are, and you'll never know how rubbish they actually were in reality. But there was a number of things that came out of that. There were some pieces that I then subsequently did with. Following that, I met someone at a football match who knew a like-minded musician who was looking to put together a band, and so we formed this band. We had a 5-piece. I must have been 15 or 16, so I was quite young. Yeah. And we had a 5-piece band. We did one show, and I was such an arrogant pain in the ass that all the members left, apart from the other guitarist. So there was 2 of us, and we'd already entered a competition. There was a very famous weekly music paper in England called Melody Maker. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Oh no, never heard of it.
Okay, well it was like the Bible out here, you know, in the 70s, and they used to have an annual competition called the National Rock Folk Competition. Wow. And I'd entered my band into it, and then I got a letter saying, you know, this is the address and the time of your first heat for this competition. But by then, all the other members had left. There was just 2 of us. And in order to comply with the rules of the competition, you had to have a minimum of 3 musicians. You couldn't be a duo. And I just left school. This must have been 1974, I think. And I was working in a record shop. And I met another guy who was my kind of age, and he played the trumpet. So I asked him to come down, and so we went and we did this heat, playing very odd music that I'd written as a 3-piece, 2 screaming lead guitars and a trumpet. Can you imagine anything worse? And when we got to the heat, it was full of semi-pro bands from my local area, from the Watford area, who were all very competent and you know, semi-pro and very good. And we went on and we played this weird music. And they were all standing back going, oh, this is a nonsense. Anyway, we won the heat. And then we got to the semi-final and we won that. And then we ended up at the final at the Roundhouse. And as a result of that, we got a manager and we got an agent. And then we started touring. So that's kind of how I started at the age of 16 or 17. Yeah.
My God. And then at the time you decided, you need to convince your parents, well, music is going to be my career. I don't want to do that.
No, I know. I failed to convince my parents of that. In fact, at the age of 16, my adoptive father gave me an ultimatum, and he was a foreman at a local paper mill. So he had a very stable, quite well-paid job, working class job. And he said, I can get you a job at the paper mill. I said, I don't want a job at the paper mill. He said, okay, I was 16 years old, right? He said, either you get a proper job or you can live somewhere else. So he kicked me out of the house.
My God, man.
And so I ended up, you know, what do they call it these days? Sofa surfing.
Yeah, sofa surfing,
yeah. And then I ended up, I was a lodger and it's funny that, you know, I look back at it now and actually, the motivating nature of trying to prove him wrong was terribly strong, you know. And I sometimes wonder whether, had he been incredibly encouraging, I may not have done as well as I had.
That's right, absolutely.
Yeah, isn't that weird, man? I mean,
yeah,
I was so determined to prove him wrong, you know.
Look at you now, man. You have played with the best musician in the world, man. Yeah.
Well, you know, that is just so weird. You don't know this, but there's a very famous quiz program in England called Mastermind.
Yeah.
It's quite intellectual. It's very, very difficult program. Contestants go on. It's been running since the 70s.
Yeah.
And people go on and they have a specialist subject. Quite often it is quite specific and obscure. And then there's a general knowledge round. And there's no cash for winning this. I think you get a glass trophy. It's very English, very BBC. Anyway, Monday, two days ago, one of the contestants, his specialist subject was King Crimson.
My God.
And his last question, it was on the BBC. It's like one of the major channels. And his last question was about me. And the question was, long before he joined King Crimson, Jakko Jakszyk saw them as a 13-year-old boy. And what town did he see the concert in? You know.
My God, that's so beautiful.
Isn't that weird? And it was part of how surreal this whole journey has been, because that concert that I went to, which of course I remember vividly, really changed my life. I remember leaving that concert thinking, I have to do this for a living. I was so motivated and changed and inspired. And who would have thought all these years later I'd actually end up being in the very same band? It's mad, really. It's like a mad childhood dream.
I got you. Oh, I understand that. And then, so when you began playing the guitar and playing in these bands, but you're very talented. You develop an interest in singing. How they came along together? At high school, the teacher say, well, you have a good...
I was in the choir. I was in the school choir.
Yeah.
So the singing, and as I say, I then found out years later that my mum was quite a famous singer. So that's obviously part of it.
Yeah.
Obviously, stylistically, I was very influenced by, I remember even quite young, as a child, being very drawn to people that were English, that sang in an English accent. Because there were these English singers and they were trying to sound like American. And I thought, well,
what's the point?
Why do that? Because you're English, So there were singers like Matt Monro and Anthony Newley who sang in a very English way. And then when the rock thing started happening, there were people that, well, obviously, like most of the Crimson singers, Greg Lake and John Wetton, they all sang with they had an English tone, an English expression in their voice. And also, I was a big fan of Richard Sinclair from Hatfield in the North, Robert Wyatt. That was part of my kind of thing, really, what I was listening to and being influenced by. And
then you have done a lot of acting as well, right? Like in plays.
Oh yeah, when I was a kid, acting was listen. When I was a kid, it struck me that my two likeliest professions were a professional footballer or an actor. And I had a trial because I did reasonably well at a kind of kid level. I was in the school team. I was in a representative side for Hertfordshire, and I had a trial for Watford, which didn't go very well. So it's funny looking back at it now. You think, well, why did I give up so easily? I don't know why. But I was also acting. I did all the school plays and I did the local youth theatre. And again, one of my other teachers at school said that he thought I was good enough to audition for the National Youth Theatre, which I thought was mad. And again, I went on my own to these auditions in London, and I ended up being a member of the National Youth Theatre. And I did some stuff with them. And then when I eventually left school, the very first job I did was as an actor. I got my back then you used to have a union card. I don't know if it's the same way you are, but back then, I don't think it exists. It doesn't exist here now, but back then you could only act if you had the equity union card, and you couldn't get a card if you didn't act. It became if you didn't have a job, you couldn't get a job, and And I was lucky enough to get a job where they gave me my first union card. So yes, I did start acting too.
And did you begin making a little bit of money before music was paying out? And...
Well, kind of, yeah. I ended up doing. I used to do voiceovers, which is quite well paid, and unless you tell people about it, they don't really know it's you. But I kind of gave up acting and took music seriously, and then in the middle of it, I started acting again. I got again. It's like a lot of my career. It's complete fluke and luck. And I was living in a house, a shared house, and one of the girls that lived in the house was going out with Michael Attenborough, who was the son of Sir Richard Attenborough, the well-known director, yeah. And his son was a theatre director, and I'd met him socially, and he was a big fan of Jethro Tull, I seem to remember, and we got on. So we used to talk about music, and then he called me out of the blue in about 1983, I think this must be, and he said, "You don't act, do you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I do. I was in the National Youth Theatre. I've got my." It's just that I kind of stopped. Why? And he said, "Well, I'm directing a new play, and I keep seeing you in one of the roles." So I started acting again, and then I got an agent, and then I started doing a bit of TV, and then I stopped again because I thought it struck me that I couldn't do both. I don't know why I thought that, but in my head, I thought I can't be taken seriously as a musician and act. So I kind of stopped it back then. I've done bits and pieces over the years. I do little cameos just for fun, really.
Yeah, well, you're a very talented guy, man.
I think I'm a very lucky guy rather than talented.
No, I don't know if luck exists or not, right? Steve Jobs from Apple used to have like a saying, I don't remember exactly, but he says it's very easy to connect the dots looking backwards. You know? I guess, but it's very difficult to connect the dots going forward. So now, of course, the fact that your soccer career, football career didn't pan out, you end up where you are right now.
Yeah, I know, but by that same token, there are moments I look back and I think, if I hadn't have done that, this wouldn't have happened. And it seems so arbitrary. It isn't something you could have planned, or it isn't something you could have foretold or guessed or had an instinctive thing about. It was just a complete fluke, really.
Maybe each of us have guardian angels that pointed to the right direction without you knowing that.
Yeah, maybe not. If that's what you want to believe.
Are you a religious person?
No, quite the opposite.
Yeah,
I'm the opposite, really.
Yeah. All right. Well, one day we'll have a conversation.
Okay.
Face to face. I'm not a religious. I mean, I grew up in a Catholic family. But I do believe in life after life and things that happen and guardian angels. And one day I will tell you, not on the camera, but I have had many experiences that will lead you to believe that that's, I think it is what it is. No, it's not an accident.
Well, I guess maybe that's how you.
I cannot prove it though, but.
No. Well, but maybe what I see as being fortune and luck, you see as being some kind of.
Yeah.
Being directed by a guardian angel. I'm not sure I particularly believe that, but.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about 64 Spoon. How did it come together?
Well, after my brief success with this competition that I told you about,
yeah.
I then I left that band and I joined another band.
Yeah.
And we entered the same competition because I thought, well, it's easy. Look what happened last year.
Yeah.
And we went and we did a heat. And at that heat, there was a chalkboard with all the names of the bands that were playing that afternoon. And I saw this name, 64 Spoons. And I thought, what a fantastic name for a group. I've got to see them. So I made a point of watching them and they were brilliant. And I started chatting to them afterwards and we kept in touch. And eventually they asked me to join. I was a bit out of my depth, but it was kind of the equivalent of me going to music college, really, because the keyboard player was studying at the Royal Academy of Music. The bass player was at the Royal College studying classical guitar and flute. One of the other members of the band was at the Royal School. So they were all really, and I was, compared to them, I was a complete chancer, but it was a real education. And we toured a lot, and we played all the terrible venues across England, and never quite broke through, but we made enough of an impression to get a reputation, to get a small audience. And actually being in that band is what led me to meet keyboard player Dave Stewart, who at the time was in Bruford's band, Bill Bruford's band. And that's how I met Bill. Bill came to a show of that band I was in. So when the band split up and when Bruford split up, Dave Stewart asked me to join a new band he was putting together. So that's kind of my trajectory into all of that stuff, really.
I got you. What kind of music were you listening to at the time? You remember?
Yeah.
Progressive stuff, or?
Yeah, mostly. I mean, from the early 70s onwards, I know, I think the first album I ever bought was an album called Chicago Transit Authority, the very first Chicago album. And I think people that only know Chicago from their rather bland AOR period from the mid-80s onwards, the first two albums had some amazing things on.
Absolutely.
And experimental, the very first album, Transit Authority, is a double album, and a whole of one side, about 20 minutes, is devoted to a track called Freeform Guitar, which is largely just feedback, By the time they'd become a kind of top 10 syrupy ballad band in the mid-80s, you could never have believed that that's how they started. But and Terry Kath, the guitar player, was one of my first heroes. So I started listening to that, and then I had a friend, a next door neighbor, who was 2-3 years older than me, and of course at that age, that's quite significant. And he knew about all this new music that I've never heard, and it was he that played me a track off a sampler album, and it was King Crimson. It was 21st Century Schizoid Man. So,
man.
And then Crimson led to all sorts of stuff. I became a fan of Gentle Giant. I became an enormous fan of an English band called Henry Cow, who I absolutely loved and followed religiously. And Genesis. I think the Peter Gabriel lineup of Genesis with Steve and Phil are the band I probably saw most live. I saw them, 10 times as a kid, because they used to play locally quite a lot.
Yeah.
Oh yes, it was all of that. And I would, and then there was the whole jazz inspired thing. John McLaughlin, Chick Corea, it was such an exciting time for me as a musician,
Yeah, that you mentioned Genesis with Peter Gabriel. That's one of my top three bands, and I have a lot of music, and I like a lot of different things. But in my opinion, right, the best three bands in the history of music are Genesis, Led Zeppelin, and Pink Floyd by far, and all English bands, and they way ahead of the time, I think.
Yeah, I was never a Pink Floyd fan.
Really? Yeah.
No, in fact, I remember in the 80s when I was doing my solo stuff, I had a solo band.
Yeah.
And for a while I had a backing singer who I did a lot of work with, who was fantastic, called Sam Brown. And she sang with them. And in 94, I think it was, she invited me to see Pink Floyd at Earl's Court. And I thought, oh, God.
Yeah, Earl's Court, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, and I went. I didn't really want to go. And I was completely blown away. I'd never... Seeing them in a big arena like that kind of suddenly made sense of all of it. Yeah. And I was very taken with Dave Gilmour. I thought he was brilliant. I thought he had such a unique thing that was just him. But up until that, it wasn't really my thing. I guess I was more into composition. And the Pink Floyd thing just seemed much more kind of, it all felt very mid-tempo, and, you know, it wasn't really my thing, you know.
Yeah. Led Zeppelin, do you like Led Zeppelin at the time? Or?
Yeah, I liked Zeppelin at the time. I mean, I wasn't as big a fan. I mean, I had a couple of Zeppelin albums and I liked them.
Yeah.
But they weren't, you know, as I say, King Crimson, Genesis, Gentle Giant, bits of Soft Machine, on the North,
big names, man. Yeah.
Henry Cow, you know, it was all. I guess it was stuff that was more detailed in its composition. I guess that's what attracted me to it. I was a kid. I didn't really know it was complicated or weird. I had no idea. It just kind of spoke to me.
I got you, right. It so happened that when I put this radio together, I had the opportunity to, as I mentioned before, to interview Steve Hackett and then Anthony Phillips, and very, very nice people, very, very good man.
Well, yes, of course. I know Steve. I've worked with Steve.
Yeah.
I sang on the Regenesis 2 album, and then I've guested with him live a few times. And
really? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we did. There's a DVD, I think, of me singing Entangled.
Yeah.
And then the following year, because we'd become very friendly, and the following year, he called me up and he said, "Oh, you still coming to the show on Saturday?" Which was in London at Hammersmith. And I said, yeah. Is it a problem with the tickets? I understand London shows are a nightmare. He said, no. If you're still coming, do you fancy singing? And I went, yeah, all right. What do you want me to sing? He said, do you fancy singing the Firth of Fifth?
Oh my God.
And I thought, what? Because I used to go and see Genesis singing that, and there I was at Hammersmith Odeon singing that. It was mad. Well, just another one of those mad moments, you know, of which I've had many.
Yeah.
But it was great. He's been so nice and so supportive of me. He's a very, very nice man.
Yeah, he's a very nice
great guy.
And I interviewed his sister-in-law recently, Amanda Lehman. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago. She's a very nice person. All the British people I have interviewed have been very, very nice. The American are more uptight, I think. I don't know if it's the right word to say.
Well, you've obviously not interviewed Tony Levin, who's not remotely uptight and is a nicer man you could not meet.
Hopefully you can help me out with some names here. Yeah, definitely. I wanna interview. I have seen Tony playing with his brother, and of course I have seen, playing with you guys, with King Crimson several times, but I haven't been able to get a hold of him, but I know he's a very good person too.
He's a lovely man, very
decent
nice
guy. Yeah,
great. Yeah, he's great company, charming. He's a fantastic guy.
Fantastic. What about? Let's go to. Do you play with Level 42? How was that experience?
Well, this is one of those stories that I say, how lucky I've been. There was a guy who was quite successful in the late 70s and early 80s in England, a singer-songwriter called Tom Robinson, who, very talented guy, lovely guy, a big gay activist, and he wrote some songs with Elton John, wrote some songs with Pete Gabriel, and in the late 80s, I'd written some songs on an album that was quite successful around the world. And my publisher, they do what publishers do, which is try and make you connect with other people who've had success, And they gave me a list of people as potential co-writers. And I didn't really want to work with any of them. In fact, there was only 2 names on the list that I wanted to even meet, really. One was Pete Sinfield. Yeah. Because after Crimson, he'd become this very successful pop lyricist. And the other was Tom Robinson, who I was a genuine fan of. And so I met Tom, and we got on really well, and we did loads and loads of stuff. We did, we wrote the theme to a TV series. We co-wrote all the music to the incidental music to the TV series. I toured with him. We toured within a band. I toured as a duo with him. And then we started writing together, and we made an album, which got amazing reviews. But it was on a tiny label, and they hardly had any kind of marketing or PR. And I got a phone call one evening saying, we've got you on live TV to promote this album. I said, great. And they told me the TV show, and I knew the TV show. It was on late at night in England, and it was a car crash. It was one of those terrible, cheesy, awful programs. And I said, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. It's the kind of program that's on in England after the pubs close. It's crass. It's embarrassing. I don't have anything to do with it. So I refused to do it. And then Tom Robinson phoned me up and said, please, will you do this as a favor? And I went, oh. So I said, oh, all right. And I remember it was shot in a place called Leeds, which is a few hours away from where I live. And I remember on the day packing all my equipment and driving up to Leeds and resenting every mile that I drove. And we went up there and we did the show. And, I played a solo, I sang, I played a bit of keys in this one song. But I thought it was awful and I hated it. And I didn't stay over in the hotel. I drove straight home. And then a few months later, I got a phone call out of nowhere from Mark King from Level 42. I didn't know Mark King. I'd never spoken to him. Didn't know him from Adam, really. And he left an answer phone message one morning and said, I need to talk to you. It's quite urgent. Will you call me straight back? And I thought, what? So I called him back, and he said, he explained what happened to their career. Al Murphy, great guitar player, died. They made a new album. The record company didn't like it. They've now signed a brand new deal. They need a permanent member. And did I want the job? And I was confused. And I said, well, no, wait a minute. Do you want me to audition? He said, no, there's no audition. The job's yours. Do you want it? And I said, yes, because I was in real trouble. I was just about to be made bankrupt by the Inland Revenue in England. So I said, yes. Anyway, so then I joined Level 42. And months later, once I got to know Mark a bit better, I said, I'm confused. How on earth I said, every guitarist in England wanted that job. Because it was that rare beast, it was a band that were commercially very successful, but had a great reputation as being, good players and stuff. I said, how on earth did I get the job? He said, a number of people I respect recommended you. He said, but I'd never heard of you. He said, and then I got in from the pub late one evening and I turned on the TV.
Oh my God, man.
And I thought, I so didn't want to do that. And if I hadn't, and it saved my life, it saved my life, that job. So yeah, he turned on the TV and he thought, oh, that's the guy everybody's been recommending me. Oh, blimey, he can play and he can sing. And oh yeah, he's great. We'll get him. And that's how I got this. So that's what I'm telling you about luck, right? I so didn't want to do that job. And yet I was persuaded to do it. And if I hadn't, I wouldn't have. And who knows where I'd be now, You just don't know.
Well, that's good for you, man. Let's talk about your influence of Allan Holdsworth. How did you get a hold of him at the beginning? And I know the story, but some of the audience may not know.
Okay, well, here's the thing. I read, because I was a big King Crimson fan.
Sure.
Whenever there was an interview with Robert Fripp, I would read it, taking every word. And I read an interview with him once in the early 70s, and he said that the only English guitar player worth listening to was a guy called Allan Holdsworth. And I thought, I've never heard of Allan Holdsworth.
Wow.
And then I heard that the same guy had joined Soft Machine. So I bought tickets to go and see Soft Machine at the Rainbow in London. And I was quite near the front, and out came this guy with a white SG. And I was just absolutely blown away. I'd never heard anyone make a sound like that. I'd never seen anybody play like that. And I was absolutely mesmerized. I thought he was incredible. So I instantly became this enormous Holdsworth fan, and then tried to find every record he'd ever been on. And as I say, I just left school, so it was 74. So I was working in a record shop, And a year maybe later, he joined Gong. He joined a version of Gong, and the album came in when I was working in the record shop. And again, I thought his playing was incredible. So